Welcome to That's Canon, the podcast talking about the canon film series and other similar movies. And I'm your host, Phil.
And I'm infected. Ooh.
That's right.
Ugh.
It's been about 2 years, and I think it's the right time for us to do the pandemic special.
The pandemic special. Yes, the thing that you definitely wanted from your favorite podcast is to be reminded of the horrible pandemic that we've all been living with for geez, yeah, almost exactly like 2 years to the dot
Yeah,
to the day since we've been recording this. Yeah.
we started the podcast to get through the pandemic, and I thought, it'll be like a year and a half kind of thing, but we're going on 2 solid years now, so let's unease ourselves and talk about a movie that deals with a deadly disease. And that's,
Yay.
you brought up watching Ebola syndrome.
Ah, yes, Ebola syndrome. At least it's not, I mean, I'm sure we'll get the deluge of COVID-19 related movies at some point in the future, but right now, Ebola syndrome is what we got. And boy, does this deliver. Like, so I know this is definitely in the like in similar movies category. I mean, it's not a canon movie. It's what 1996, I think, right?
Yeah,
But boy, it's in good company there. But in terms of quality and just insanity, it's past 11, Phil. It's like 12 or 13.
this was a movie that I think when you sent the synopsis for it, I bought it blind because it was one of their Black Friday deals, but you also were talking very highly of it. And if you look at the cover, it's it's, I guess I won't say unassuming, but it's just Chinese guys kind of like screaming, blood coming out, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, it's just like a cutesy, not cutesy, but like your standard, I guess, what was it, like outbreak or
Yeah.
quarantine, something like that,
Yeah,
right? Just set in Hong Kong.
exactly. Like, yeah, like there's like a more conventional yeah, pandemic kind of movie, pandemic scare kind of movie where there's like it's yeah, like I think Contagion's a good example where only maybe a little bit more on the horror side. Yeah, definitely the cover. Vinegar Syndrome put out a Blu-ray of it, which we can talk about. But yeah, the cover definitely, you don't really know what you're in for just looking at the cover. It definitely seems like it's more along the same lines as some of their other releases. Um, but yeah, it's it's not even close. It's like, way up there in the category of most offensive, gruesome, shocking movies that I've ever seen. I don't know about you.
It is one of the most offensive movies I've ever seen. That's for sure. Just not even just like an assault on, I guess, bad taste, but it has everything that you would go, ooh, why am I watching this? Blatant racism, animal cruelty abound. One of them I can kind of forgive. The other one I can't at all. Uh, just rampant sexism, rape, tons of rape. I bet you the Canon guys, if they ever saw this movie, they were just like,
I
we didn't go hard enough.
was going to say, how come we didn't go this hard? Like, how come? Yeah, they would probably just be disappointed that they didn't think of this first and do it in the 80s.
Yeah. But like you said, Ebola syndrome, it came out in 1996, and it's directed by Herman Yau, which I got to tell you, I'm almost assuming that name is his American name. I can't believe that.
Oh
Like,
yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, they take like a Western name. I'm sure he's got like a different name that he's like born with. But
exactly. He's directed a ton of stuff over in Hong Kong. And I know this is kind of like a thing we were just talking about before the we started recording, wanting to see more films from Hong Kong. But
yeah,
Herman Yao started a series called Troublesome Night. It's a film series. Greg,
okay.
there's 20 of them.
Oh my god. Wow, he's I mean, I heard that he was like a prolific director, but 20
20.
all
There's
directed by this
20.
guy.
He didn't direct all of them. He went up to, it looks like, number 7.
Okay, and handed the reins
That's
over. That's still
handed
impressive,
the
though.
reins over. It's like, yeah, I mean, that's almost all the Fast and the Furious series right there, directed by just one dude. That's insane. I wonder if that is the longest any film series has ever been directed by a single director.
Yeah. How many Lone Wolf and Cub movies are there? There's a lot of those too,
I
aren't
think there's like
there?
6.
6. Jeez. And that again, like that's just the ones that he directed. The movie
Yeah.
they kept going for wow. I mean, yeah, this guy he's nothing if not like sounds like a businessman. And he geez, like that's another thing tying this to canon in terms of, legacy and just sheer volume of output per year. I mean, how many movies is that per year? If he was doing 20 of this series, how many was this guy, involved with otherwise? I'm
Oh,
sure just tons.
I mean, his list is 74 on IMDb. It's
Impressive.
insane. I mean, he's directed stuff like Yip Man, which is a film series starring Donnie Yen as Master Yip, the guy who trained Bruce Lee.
Oh, that's a really well known series. I remember
Yeah.
that guy was in Star Wars too, in Rogue
Yep.
One.
Yep. Donnie Yen. He was in Star Wars. He was Chirrut. I mean, it's insane that he's directing so much stuff. Uh
And and Ebola syndrome.
and
Bring it
Ebola syndrome.
like I don't know, like you said, we were talking about this before, and this actually a really good segue into the story of how I discovered this movie because this whole like we're growing up, we were exposed to mostly Western produced movies, right? Like a lot of American productions and maybe some from Europe, UK, mostly probably. Lots of Canadian produced movies, but generally like the Anglophone parts of the world, right? This this wasn't my introduction to Asian like horror cinema. It definitely the craziest. But let's say let's take us back to early 2020. The pandemic has just started kind of rearing its head. Everything is starting to close down, and businesses are starting to have to get creative on how to stay in business basically, right? So of course movie theaters were really hard hit. Our favorite Alamo Draft House was not spared that fate. They had to shut down pretty early on, and only really recently did they. I mean, what like mid 2021 did they start opening up. They did they did some drive-in stuff nearby us here, but for the most part they were pretty much closed.
Yeah.
um so yeah, kind of back in 2020 when things were still really bad and kind of and really uncertain and no one knew how long it was going to last, so they were trying to get creative. So early on Alamo started doing some like online stuff. And this is so before they eventually came up with like an on-demand service which had its own app and like a dedicated streaming platform. But or before that they did some kind of digital rentals, which is it was kind of closer to the Video Vortex, the weekly thing where they would kind of show niche like old horror and action movies. And it wasn't even, like I said, it was before the Alamo on demand service. So this was just, I think it was like, I think they were through Vimeo, like digital rentals. And it was like open for a certain window of time on a Friday or a Thursday, and you'd rent it. And then they would typically set up like a live stream chat where everyone would kind of sync up their video and watch all at the same time. And there'd be a live chat. And I mean, it was an okay, surrogate for the real in theater experience. So they did a whole bunch of crazy movies through that. And one of the early titles that they did was a movie called Centipede Horror from 1982. This is probably the first Hong Kong horror movie that I had ever seen. And Phil, did you watch this one too?
Yes,
Okay, you
I
did.
did. It was
Um,
awesome.
and it was awesome, right? And it's just bonkers. I mean, it's just full of like, and it's a full of stuff. Nowadays, it's just like crazy because I've seen crazy movies directed in Western parts of the world, but this was crazy in ways that are like really unfamiliar. Like there's like the obvious, like there's like the obvious gross out and gore shots, like practical effects. There's, that stuff I've seen before. But the really crazy parts for me were the parts of the movie that were really steeped in kind of, Asian culture and religion and tradition and myth and all that stuff. Like just the wizard battles, like the shaman battles in this movie, I'd never seen anything like it. And it goes on for like 20 minutes. It's absolutely insane. But it's like two wizards fighting each other at a distance, and it's just like lots of like flashing strobe lights and smoke effects and wire work. It's just awesome. I'd never seen
Yes.
anything like it. And right after I saw that, I knew I had to start seeking out more of that. So I landed on, I started doing searches for not like Hong Kong horror movies specifically, but I stumbled onto their rating system, and there's like a really notorious rating called Category 3, which is kind of like their equivalent to an NC-17 rating in the US, where it's basically no one under 17, 18 will ever be admitted to the theater where this is showing. Like lots of sex and violence and nudity, but not necessarily outright pornography. So I started like sifting through lists of these Category 3 movies just to see what other kind of crazy stuff that I could find. And I'm not sure how much searching you've done, but this stuff is really hard to find. I mean, a lot of it has probably never seen a mainstream streaming service in like outside of that part of the world, if at all. And even then, a lot of you can only kind of find it on DVD, but even then those are hard to find, where there's usually like imports, which you're lucky if you'll get one that's region coded for a player here, or they're like a bootleg kind of gray market DVD, which I know you've stumbled into by accident. I know I have too.
Yeah.
Which yeah, you get it, and the label looks all kind of like, this looks like it came out of an inkjet printer, kind of sketchy, right?
Yes.
So I did a lot of searching, and I came across, there were like I ended up buying 3 DVDs off of Amazon. They were like third party sellers of the ones, like these are the ones that the only ones I could really find that were somewhat legit looking. One of them was Ricky O, the story of Ricky, which another one from the 90s. I think it's more of like an action horror. It's like kung fu guy. He fights his way through a corrupt prison, and it's just really crazy martial arts movie with way over the top gore. Lots of fun. The second one I bought was a movie called Devil Fetus, which I lent to you, and I'm sure it's just from the title alone, you can imagine how crazy it is. I think it's the premise is there's like an evil spirit. It escapes from like a broken vase or pottery or something, and it just possesses people, and crazy things happen. And Phil, the third movie that I bought in that initial set was Ebola Syndrome.
It's insane that you found this movie before it got a Vinegar Syndrome release. I don't think that's this, like, has there been any Vinegar Syndrome release that we have seen before it got released through that platform?
The only other one that I can think of is Action USA, but that was only like a couple of months before the Blu-ray came out, and I think it was actually one that I saw as part of one of those Alamo on demand things. They had the director on to talk about it after the fact, and I think they were only doing that thing because they knew the Blu-ray was coming out, so they were trying to like build up interest. But yeah, otherwise, never before have I. It's like, wow, I've seen that before when perusing the Vinegar Syndrome like catalog.
Not only is it like, wow, I've seeing Action USA before, but being able to find a Hong Kong film
Yeah,
and going, I've seen this one before it got to Vinegar Syndrome. That's insane.
So yeah, fast forward then to what was it, like Black Friday, right? I think that was one of the Black Friday releases, 2021. More than a year later, I'd seen Ebola Syndrome, was like, wow, I was floored. I had never seen anything like it. But then it kind of like faded to the back of my mind. Yeah, so yeah, fast forward to Black Friday 2020, eagerly anticipating the new Vinegar Syndrome releases, and Phil, I could not believe my eyes. I about fell out of my chair, like, wow, oh my god, they did Ebola Syndrome. Not only that, it was a 4K remaster, total rescan of the original negatives. Like, it was like Christmas morning, a
It's
horrible
insanity.
Christmas morning.
And I didn't really think too much of it. Like, I knew you had the hype behind it going like, oh, this movie is disgusting. And you're like, it's as bad, if not worse, than Cannibal Holocaust in certain ways. But at the time, not having seen this film, I was like, there's no way that this could be that worse. Like they
Greg,
literally
you're a little full of
rip
shit.
a turtle apart in Cannibal Holocaust.
Yeah, yeah. And that's, I mean, that's probably the most, one of the most shocking parts about that movie is just the kind of graphic animal cruelty. I think they kill a primate too, which is also really like it's yeah, you wouldn't think that the movie like that would be topped, let alone a movie made 20 years later in the 90s when things were a little bit more I don't know. I feel like a lot of things that happened in like those late 70s exploitation movies just kind of fell out of favor.
Do you think that Hong Kong films, they don't have like, what is it, the Humane Society or whatever it is, like on their
That
sets?
I don't know. That's they definitely didn't for this one. I don't see how they could and not and have and still being able to put on screen what we saw happen.
100%, because spoilers, they rip a chicken in half. They rip a chicken's head right off of its body in this movie.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like we should say right up front, if that's a subject that you find uncomfortable to hear about, definitely skip this episode because it's like that's just like the tip of the iceberg. But also, I would say if you're one of the weirdos like us who likes this kind of movie, I would say stop this episode right now. Go watch it. Go grab the Vinegar Syndrome release, or go watch it at a friend's house. Like find a way to see this movie and then listen to the episode because I don't. In rare, this is a rare case where I don't want to spoil the movie for you.
I thought you were gonna say, in case you're one of those weirdos that does love animal cruelty, boy, are you in for a treat.
You're in for a treat. Those kind of weirdos, please just turn it off because I don't want you around.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, this is definitely one of those things where if you're interested at all, like you said, of weird genre films, stop now and then come back later. And what's interesting is that our main character, you can't really call him a hero because we follow the villain of the film, and the hero actually is just kind of like nestled safely in the background for a good majority of the movie.
Yeah.
Is played by Hong Kong actor Anthony Wong. Now, when I first saw the film last night, I was like, I've never seen this guy before in anything, but I did take a peek at
Mhm.
his IMDb. He's actually been in three films that I have seen. He was in the John Woo classic Hard Boiled, starring Chow Yun Fat.
Yeah.
He was in Infernal Affairs, which had an American remake called The Departed, directed by Martin Scorsese. It won Best Picture. And one of his few American releases, he was in The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, the shitty one out of the three.
Wait, was that like after the Scorpion King?
Yeah,
Oh, geez,
that
I
was
don't
the
even
one
know.
with Brendan Fraser and Jet
And
Li.
Jet Li, yeah, I don't even know if I saw that one. Geez,
That's
but
the
good for
one
him.
where Rachel Weisz didn't come back, and it was Maria Bello was in the film, and
Oh,
it was just
they
like,
just straight up recast her. Yikes.
yeah, it didn't even look anything like her. Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. But yeah, this guy from the get-go
whew.
in this movie, you hate him.
Oh yeah, I feel like so. Yeah, I mean, we can kind of start going through the movie beats. I feel like what we should say up front though is, yeah, you're right. We follow what is essentially the villain as our main character, but when we talk about how shocking and offensive this movie is, it normally these kind of movies will wind up to their craziness a little bit. This movie is like Kool-Aid Man's its way into your house and just like cranks up the insanity almost immediately. And I think that works so well because right off the get-go, it not only earns its rating, but you don't know like this, this movie is capable of anything. I think it's something I said to you yesterday when we were watching it. Like the fact that it starts so hard you just like, wow, this movie could do anything now. Like nothing is off the table for this kind of movie based on what we see in the beginning here.
Yeah. So, yeah. Usually there's a buffer between the beginning of the movie and when you start seeing boobies. This is like it's immediate. A mother sends a daughter downstairs because, in quotes, the uncle is over, and it's actually Anthony Wong,
His
the
character's
the
name is
villain,
Kai.
who's the villain Kai is having sex with his boss's wife. Now, they don't really say what they just say it's the boss's wife, right? I'm assuming it's like organized crime of some kind.
Yeah, they definitely like a blue collar neighborhood. And just based on the fact that when the husband comes back, he's got like hired goons with him. Yeah, it's definitely like like a mob boss or something.
But in it's I mean the sex is fairly graphic. Obviously, they don't show like pornographic type stuff, but a lot of the
Right.
dialogue is absurd. It's a lot of like, do this, do that, oh yeah,
Yeah.
do that, do this.
He, he's very particular about the movements that he's looking her to provide. And yeah, it's we should also mention now that this is actually a comedy. Like you're meant to laugh at this idiot and how horrible he is. And this is like, yeah, it's just laugh out loud kinds of the way that he's narrating his own sex scene is pretty funny.
The wife is like, oh, don't worry, my husband won't be home. But as any good movie does, as soon as the character says that, the
Mm.
husband comes home, and immediately Kai and the wife, they start selling each other up the river or down the river or to the side of the
No,
river.
I would he forced me to do it or she forced me, like they're like pitting it against each other.
Exactly. The boss eventually is like, okay, Kai, cut your own dick off. That is not an exaggeration to any effect.
No,
His punishment is to cut his own dick off.
he literally like he hands him a pair of gardening shears. Yeah, cut your own dick. He's like that's the offending member. You need to cut it off.
Horrifying. Kai, after getting a fairly large pair of gardening shears, ends up stabbing just a random goon in his dick
Goes full RoboCop.
and then proceeds to brutally murder everyone in the room. I
But
mean,
Phil, you forgot the golden shower, Phil.
oh my God. That's right. Before Kai gets told to cut his own dick off, the boss tells his wife to piss on him, to piss on Kai because he's worthless. And usually you get just like I guess like a shot of non-action. You just kind of hear the liquid.
And you see
No,
you cut to like a reaction shot of like a character who's watching this horrible thing happen.
you get full on like between the leg shot, and you see Kai's face get pissed on.
Yeah, we weren't kidding. My good listeners, when this movie goes to 11, so like, and this is not even 5 minutes into the movie, and we're getting this.
Did you know? Okay, so you saw the new Matrix movie, right?
Yeah.
So spoilers for at the end, they do the song Bulls on Parade by Rage Against the Machine. I believe that's the name of the song. But it's a cover. It's a cover
Yeah.
by a band called Brass Up, in
Mhm.
which the lead singer is female. Recently, they were at a concert, or they were having a concert, and the lead singer pulls up a male fan and she proceeds to piss on his face in front of everyone in the concert venue. It's online. You can actually see it.
Or
So
feel free to take our word for it.
within the last 2 weeks, Greg, I have seen in real life and in fiction some dude just get full splashed right in the face.
What kind of lives are we leading?
I don't know. It's
What?
the pandemic, man.
This is some kind of weird darkest timeline shit.
It is.
But yeah,
Uh
we don't normally like. Again, it just goes to show you that this movie is shocking in every way possible. It doesn't just lean into like gore or sexual violence or any of the usual trappings of these kind of genre pictures. It it surprises you with the ways in which it offends you.
exactly.
And right up front, there's a scene. This guy, he's pissed off that his wife is cheating on him, and he tells her to pee on this guy's face, and she does, and we see it. I'm like,
It's
oh my god.
insane. Uh the little girl is the little girl that was told to go downstairs is hiding somewhere inside of this apartment, and she's just kind of like shocked, and Kai grabs her, douses her with gasoline, and is about to light her on fire and kill her. And he essentially says like, don't worry, being lit on fire is a quick and easy death, which it is not a quick
Oh
and easy death.
no.
It is horrifyingly long and painful.
Probably the worst way to die, up there with like drowning, I feel like, or other forms of horrible torture.
But fortunately, just some random, I'm assuming, employee of the boss comes in and was like, "What are you doing?" And Kai's like, "Oh, just murdering people." And he runs away.
Thank
uh,
God that guy showed up, because this movie knows it crosses a lot of lines, but it knows not to cross that line. Lighting
yeah,
like someone underage on fire, like, boy, does it toe that line? It gets real close.
it
And again,
gets
you
super
know,
close.
yeah, it's all based on the craziness we've seen so far. You almost half believe that it's going to happen. Thank God it doesn't.
Yeah, thank God it doesn't. But he leaves and he gets to Johannesburg, which I was a little confused about. I was like,
Yeah,
China's kind of like, especially Hong Kong is kind of big. Why would he go? But who cares? He goes to Johannesburg,
right.
South
Fleas
Africa,
on the run.
and it's like what, 10 years later, right? It kind of comes up and it's like 10 years later,
Yeah, yeah, like 10 years. 10 years have
Johannesburg.
passed.
And Kai is now working for another Chinese family in a restaurant, which I was kind of surprised that Johannesburg is so multicultural, right? I kind of just
Mhm.
figured that it would just be the people of South Africa who live there. I wouldn't have expected, because they kind of like talked about how there's like a little China in Johannesburg.
Yeah,
Maybe it's all made up for the movie. I don't know. I've never been to Johannesburg. Uh, but he works in a Chinese restaurant where he's rightfully so treated like a piece of shit, right? He's kind of like, I wouldn't say he's human trafficked, but he's pretty much treated like a human trafficking victim, where
yeah,
his place, where his house is tied directly to his place of employment, and he says that he doesn't get paid a lot. He does a lot of work for little pay, and he essentially has like a one room place to live in.
yeah. Even the manager of the restaurant, the owner of the restaurant, he's talking to his wife, who kind of like is a co-manager, and even they're saying like they hate this guy because he's a scumbag, and they want to fire him, but the boss, he's like, well, where else are we going to find someone so cheap? And yeah, it's like almost he's like I think they think they know that he's on the run, so that they can afford to pay him less, because like where else are you going to find work? Or like they're almost like holding it over his head, blackmailing him almost. But yeah, I mean, he lives there with them practically in like a little side apartment, and yeah, gets paid peanuts. It's really interesting, weird dynamic.
And I wondered, like, when I was watching it, I'm like, is this a turn? Am I supposed to now like feel sympathy for this guy or something?
Oh no,
Because
no,
they're
no,
they're
no.
kind of like laying it on thick when we get back to it, right?
Mhm.
But no, you're not supposed to feel really anything for this guy. They do make some pretty good meals though. Like the food that they make does look, appetizing to the eye.
Yeah. It- and you hear like extras coming into the restaurant. Like the restaurant's always packed. You hear them talking about how good of a restaurant it is, which it makes the it's a good setup for what happens later.
which is they need to go out and they well I guess this is like the first trigger warning of animal cruelty, because when we see Kai working in the kitchen, he is filleting frogs alive
Yeah,
to
for
make
like a soup or
frog
something. Yeah.
frog fried rice, I believe is what they were
Oh yeah.
making.
Yep.
Horrifying. But
Again, yeah, this is it's like we cut away to the 10 years later and immediately cut to that like a close-up shot of that happening. Still probably 10 minutes into the movie.
have you ever had frogs?
Uh no, I think there was some frog dish when we were living in Florida that I think my parents might have tried. I could
I've
be
had frog
mixing this up,
legs.
but yeah. I
uh
yeah, never had it.
Tastes like chicken. Maybe that's just the Matrix not knowing what frogs taste like, and they all
So
taste like pasty wheat. But yeah, like it tastes like chicken. I don't know. If I had to, I'd eat a frog. But anyways, back
but
to the
nothing special,
movie.
yeah.
Yeah.
Back to the movie.
They Kai and his boss, who looks like Asian Dean Kane, they need to go out and buy meat. They don't really say what kind of meat, and I thought this was weird when they were doing it. But they had to drive out into, what do they call it in Africa? Like, like it's like the outback in Australia, right? They essentially had to like drive out into,
Yeah, pretty like wild rural parts of the country.
exactly. In fact, at one point they stopped to take a pee, and a cheetah razzes them. Yeah, in which, again, I don't know what the safety standards are on Hong Kong cinema, but that cheetah was not attached to anything. And there was no visible barrier between the actors and this cheetah.
Oh yeah, they were definitely there, probably what 10 feet away from where it was standing. I mean, I'm sure it was a trained, like a quote unquote domesticated is such that you can domesticate a cheetah, but like it probably wasn't a wild cheetah, but still like that if that thing had a bad day or was really hungry or pissed off, it could seriously mess you up.
Exactly. um, but Kai and Dean Kane eventually get to the Zulu tribe, in which we see that the tribes people are suffering from some kind of open sores, some kind of plague has affected this tribe. And we get this long scene of, and I hope I'm being correct in my words. If not, I'm sorry. Some kind of like witch doctor type ceremony is going on,
Yeah,
in
I think
which,
voodoo is like that's the imagery that's coming to my mind. I know that's wrong, but that's
yeah,
the kind of like imagery that you can kind of imagine here.
in which he's like taking large mouthfuls of alcohol and spitting it everywhere. I made a joke about how he's spreading COVID 100. Uh, and
Little did we know.
also, they're ripping the heads off of live chickens. These aren't dummy chickens. These are real life uh, chickens that you would like deep fry to eat.
Yeah, like you
Um,
see them running around in the scene, and then they're picked up by the kind of the tribe leader, and you see like without cutting, he just kind of kills them for you right in front of the camera.
what's even more horrifying than the animal cruelty is that the fact that they also put the chickens up to their mouths and suck out the blood and spit it on the people as well. That's
Yes.
horrifying.
Yeah, I have nothing even to say to that. It's you'd never see anything like this in a mainstream movie.
Exactly. Kai and his boss are kind of just, I'm assuming just like us, standing there, mouth
Mouth agape.
agape, shocked at everything that they're seeing. Eventually, they get their pork that they came to buy, but not before uncovering a stack of dead bodies. Um, so
Do
as
we
they,
explain why they were coming here to begin with? Did we say that they were looking for cheap meat?
yeah, cheap meat.
Right, because we get a quick scene with them in Johannesburg trying to buy meat for the restaurant. It's like crazy expensive, and they're pissed off about having to pay that much for a pig. So that, yeah, that's why they're driving out here, is to get it cheap from this tribe instead.
And cheap, they did get it on their way back to the restaurant. Kai is trying to avoid running into an elephant, and he hits a tree. That's not a gag. That's like something that actually happens in the
That actually
movie.
happens, yeah.
His boss gets upset, as one would,
Understandable, yeah.
because the car won't start. And so Kai essentially goes, you know what, I'm fuck this, I'm leaving, I'm just gonna walk home. In which I was like, okay, this dude is gonna die by a lion, like something is gonna kill him. But unfortunately, Kai is an apex predator of a man, and he spots a woman, a tribeswoman, carrying water. I think it was water, and she
Yeah.
passes out. Right, she passes out, whether it's from extreme heat or to the virus that is killing her from the inside. Kai takes this opportunity to rape her.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
in
he
in
does.
the in the middle of his thrusts, the woman vomits all over his face,
Oh my God, it's so disgusting.
and it's again horrifying. It's horrifying that he's raping a woman who is clearly ill. It's horrifying that the ill woman is vomiting onto Kai, and it's horrifying that Kai is still determined to finish having sex.
Mm. Yeah, again, to reiterate, this normally in one of these movies we would get one of those things, not having them all happen at the same time. And then
Yes.
it goes on to, he gets, once he does finish up, he gets pissed off about having been puked on and proceeds to bash her head in with a rock.
Yeah. Like, and the sound effects and the special effects too are like, they complement each other so well, and it's I
Oh
won't
yeah.
it's very gruesome to watch.
Yeah. Really, like, yeah, as far as practical makeup effects go, it's, yeah, it's pretty, as we'll see better examples of it later on, but it's pretty, yeah, pretty true to life, as much as I can imagine such a thing.
But so Kai eventually comes back to his boss, and they make up, and they go back to the restaurant, where Kai finally crosses path with Lily. Lily is the little girl from the very beginning of the movie whose parents were murdered by Kai.
Right.
Lily has this like sixth, maybe even seventh sense of smelling Kai and like identifying him by his stench,
Yeah,
right?
I think she describes it as, I think she says she's smelling the blood, because I think he had been injured in some way, so he was bleeding a little bit. And when she passed by him, I think she somehow remembers the way that it smelled from when she was a little kid, and he was injured in that tussle with the boss. So like somehow stuck with her in a way that, yeah, she's got this sixth, seventh sense of, she can like smell him at a distance, because just based on that.
Yeah. And she gets very uneasy, but they don't see each other because Kai is carrying a pig and it's blocking his face. So Lily doesn't really see Kai. And Lily is a stewardess. That's why she's here in Johannesburg. She's
Yeah,
just like
like
on
airline.
layover.
Yeah.
Um, later that as Kai is preparing food, he passes out due to illness, and he's brought upstairs where his boss and his wife are essentially talking about how Kai is worthless. They should just let him die. A doctor comes in and sees him and is like, man, this dude is like super sick. You should really do something about it. Um, but the boss and his wife don't do anything, and they really just kind of discuss whether or not they're going to take Kai's body out and just like dump it somewhere so he can
Yeah.
die.
They really just do not want to be bothered with this guy, because, yeah, like we said before, he's basically an indentured servant. So it's just going to cause trouble. and questions from the police. So they just want to get rid of him. The wife, especially, just like, let him die. If you can't, I wish he would just die faster so that we can get rid of him. Like, no one, I mean, we've said this before about canon movies, but there's like, aside from the poor girl and some of the cops who show up later, there's no redeemable characters in this. They're all assholes of varying
Yes.
degrees.
Unfortunately for the boss and his wife, Kai is able to muster his strength and defend himself, and he brutally murders the boss of the restaurant.
Brutally.
He takes a little dish of toothpicks and jams it into his boss's eyeball, puncturing it. The boss is like flailing about, freaking out on the floor, unable to defend himself. And Kai takes it upon himself to put his boss's head in between two doors, slamming it, and then eventually ripping his head off of his shoulders.
Which is just like, I feel like that's harder to do in real life. I don't know if you could do that with just slamming indoors, but this movie is not going to let a little fling like reality keep it from showing something real grisly.
Kai even looks at the boss's wife and he's like, it just popped off.
It just popped off. Whoopsie daisy.
He then goes over to the boss's wife and rapes her. It is horrifying, absolutely horrifying, and awkwardly long scene. In fact, it's too long of a scene, in my opinion.
Oh, yes.
It just kind of keeps going and going and going until Kai finishes having sex, and then he brutally murders her by, doesn't he pick up a table and literally jam it on her head?
Yeah, he like knocks her to the floor, and just, yeah, they're like big round tables. He just picks it up and just throws it down, like edge down onto her neck, and Bob's your uncle.
And Bob's your uncle, she's dead. He then collects both the bodies and starts making hamburger out of them, which I will say this. I've seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I've seen this. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they just kind of like insinuate that they're making barbecue out of these people. That they never really show, in my opinion, the action of them doing that.
The prep,
right?
Yeah.
This was definitely like a really good scene, body horror type scene of him dissecting these people, filleting them, getting the cuts of meat. Like, I will say this, if this part was any Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, it would be the best Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie ever made.
Oh yeah, and yeah, it definitely it keeps its theme up, where it will consistently show the things that you would just get cutaways of in more tame movies. This shows all of it. It's these basically we see them butchering the husband and wife from the restaurant owners to make his special meat patties.
Horrifying. And then he goes about cleaning up the restaurant because there's a ton of blood. I made a comment to Greg while we were watching this virtually with each other. That would take forever. Blood does not clean up easily.
Okay, he just had like a mop, and it was just, we didn't even get a cleaning montage. He just like, it looks like he was just pushing the blood around. Like, it wasn't just cleaning, he was just like diluting it, and it was getting everywhere. I don't know how he cleaned this place up.
And determination. That's how he did it. But yeah, so then like the restaurant opens up the next day, and he's going about, he's kind of like, oh yeah, the boss and his wife left, they just left me here, so I'm in charge. And they just kind of like start selling all the human meat as a South African delicacy. Like, he had like a legit name for it, right?
I forget what name he gave it, but it was some, like, he definitely dressed it up to make it sound like it was, like you said, some delicacy. And oh boy, Phil, everyone just loved it, because we get 3 or 4 or 5 quick cuts of people, restaurant patrons, just loving this stuff. They're like licking their fingers, and I think there's one weird spot where like one of the patrons, he just takes the bun off and just shoves the patty into his face.
Yeah,
he's just loving it that much. But the fact that we saw people licking their fingers, and this is all really like extreme close up on people's mouths eating, it was just so like such a perfect, horrifying way to show unwitting cannibalism.
It's awesome. Oh shit! Did we forget a part? We forgot a part where the boss goes talks to the doctor, didn't we?
Oh, right. Which is that's right. That's a big scene too, because
That's
that's
the
where
whole stir of why Kai murders them.
right.
So before Kai murders his boss, the boss goes to talk to the doctor and was like, "Hey, those Zulu tribesmen that you have bought the meat from, they have the Ebola virus, and
Oh shit.
exactly. There is a extremely rare 1 in a million case where there could potentially be someone who recovers from the symptoms but becomes a carrier, like a typhoid Mary
He even
type
says the
person.
phrase super spreader is
Super
what the
spreader.
doctor said. Yeah.
Yes. I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with the phrase super spreader event by now.
Yes.
And Kai, unfortunately, is the super spreader.
One of those lucky individuals.
Yes. So yeah, so that's why Kai murdered his boss and whatnot. After a while, Kai is able to find like now we're back to he's like serving human meat and shit like that and getting people
Right.
infected, coughing on people, sneezing on people, sweating on people. Kai finds a secret cache of money that his boss had, and it they don't really put like a monetary amount to it, but it seems like it could be a few $1,000s.
Yeah.
Which,
All in American dollars too.
yes, and if you look at the conversion rate to Johannesburg and Hong Kong, the U.S. dollar definitely takes you quite a ways.
Yeah.
So Kai goes back to Hong Kong. Despite the fact that he fled Hong Kong a decade earlier, he goes back to Hong Kong.
Because I think
Um,
at that point, the after he's selling the human meat, people are starting to get infected. I think at that point the cops start to kind of get tipped off because we get a quick scene of the little girl all grown up now. She's got that sixth sense hunch that he's around because she thought she smelled him. She goes to the cops and says, like, there's a guy there. He killed my parents. The inspector blows her off, but then as people start dying, they start connecting the dots back to that guy, and they're like, oh shit, she was telling the truth. And when the cops start sniffing around the restaurant, that's when he gets tipped off and grabs that cash and books it back to Hong Kong.
we kind of glossed over the people dying from Ebola. They are essentially Harlem shaking when they start to die. I mean, and it's so weird. I know you don't die from Ebola in this fashion, but it would be like us having a conversation out in the open, and then all of a sudden I'm just like, okay, I'm dying now, and I just
And
start thrashing
convulsing.
on the ground and die,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, they do a really good job of showing multiple people in different locations.
Kind of like all at the same time. And these were people that you saw in the restaurant before, and you kind of see them,
Exactly.
6, 8 hours later, wherever they happen to be. I think one girl was out taking a walk in a park, and one guy was getting a massage or something. Just
Yes.
all these random places, and they all start. We get like a montage of them all start to, have these convulsions immediately, and they're foaming at the mouth. And again, you see it start to spread because they do the same thing that the woman did, where she, they puke up this kind of like nasty, foamy, gross goop onto the people around them, and you say, "Oh crap! There, it's starting to spread."
And yeah,
Ugh.
it's pretty brutal. So Kai goes back to Hong Kong, where we get another really awkwardly long sex scene. Kai is now hiring prostitutes because Kai is, I mean, he's horny like a jackrabbit.
Oh yeah,
And
his first instinct is to dress up like a pimp, hole up in a fancy hotel, and start, hiring escorts.
banging hookers. So yeah, you get like a really long sex scene with that. Meanwhile, we get introduced to detective characters, Hong Kong detectives, and because Lily has kind of tipped them off that hey, this guy, he's here in Hong Kong, he's a murderer, but they don't really know, the people in Hong Kong don't really know that he has Ebola at this time.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole bunch of like working with the people over Johannesburg to figure this all out, and they eventually come to the conclusion that they're Kai, who is in Hong Kong, has Ebola, is a super spreader, and they need to find him.
Right. There's this really great scene that you commented on where they've got like a police sketch. There's because the woman, the mistress at the like escort service, she has some photographic memory for faces and does a they do like a computerized police sketch. And of course, in true 90s computer fashion, it looks exactly like him. It's practically a photograph of this guy. They put like a mustache on him and the face and the hair and the hat, all this stuff, and that's the guy. I've seen that guy before. So they've got a sketch to work from.
It's yeah. If only computers worked like that. I think like it was
enhance,
like
enhance.
it was like option mustache, and it was exactly the mustache.
Like in real that you see him wearing in real life. It's hilariously too accurate. Gotta love
But
it.
as the Hong Kong detectives are hot on the trail of Kai, they miss him by just a second exiting the hotel. And then we start getting more montages of people dying from Ebola. They have a really great scene where they're doing an autopsy on someone, and they're literally
Yeah.
peeling the skin off the face of someone. It's amazing, Greg. These are some of
Yeah.
the best gore effects I've seen in like a 90s production.
Yeah, it's really shocking. I mean, obviously Tom Savini, he's the goat in terms of practical makeup effects from that era of 80s, 70s, that kind of era of kind of gross out movie making. But typically, you don't get these extended shots like we do in this autopsy scene. I feel like this like bears special mention because we practically see the entire autopsy almost without cutaways. They do that, that typical, they call it like a Y incision or something like that, where they cut the chest open and they pull out the organs. And all the medical examiners are talking about how the organs have been turned to mush, which is a very scientific term. I love it.
Yes.
Yeah, but then like we get probably 30 seconds of just straight footage of watching them carve up what is, I mean, it's essentially a dummy, but a really hyper realistic looking dummy. We see them kind of, filleting the face skin off of this dummy and peeling it back like a banana. And we get this like horrible, nasty red goop on the inside and a skull. And they like poke at the eyes and they're all liquefied too. It's just the most disgusting gore effect you could possibly imagine. And we see it all like straight on close up.
It's great.
Outrageous.
It's so great.
Really, really well done.
And so all these people are like, okay, we really got to find this guy because he's unintentionally at this time spreading Ebola. I almost said COVID. Spreading Ebola.
Too soon.
But Kai has met up with an old flame, and essentially like his new girlfriend or his old girlfriend is like, I don't care that you murdered a whole bunch of people. I love you, which is kind of like really weird. But
Had
I
we
guess
met her before?
no,
Okay.
it came so out of left field. I was a little jarred when that happened.
Yeah.
But so he honestly it's almost like he starts turning his life around when he meets up with his old girlfriend because she has a daughter, and like they're going out on dates and they're doing like normal human things.
He's just trying to settle down because I think her husband is a deadbeat junkie. So I think her life is already kind of not doing so good. So even though this guy is a murderer, at least he's got money and can provide for the family. I'm guessing that's why she even gives this guy a shot, even though he's visibly, demonstrably a scumbag, scum of like the human race.
Yeah.
But he's at least present and can provide. So yeah, we get that montage of them going shopping and going out to eat. You should describe how the effects that we get of him spreading the germs.
So there's a few of them that work pretty well, and there's one that's amazing. So uh you see him inadvertently spread germs by like a waitress sticks her open wounded thumb into a cup that he was like eating out of, right? But when they're out clothes shopping, obviously Kai has some love, some affinity for this woman, and he's not intentionally trying to get her sick. he's about to sneeze or cough, and we actually get a POV shot of the inside of his mouth, and we see the germs as if they're like anthropomorphic beings at this time.
The little white specks.
And like we see the germs like kind of like pulsating inside of his mouth, about to be shot out because he's about to cough.
Yeah.
He doesn't on his loved ones, but we do see him cough. The germs fly out of his mouth and fly directly into the mouth of a sleeping woman.
Yeah, she's snoring and got her mouth wide open, and we see the little white specks just kind of tornado into her mouth. It's
And I swear
and
there's
like
a
little
sound
animation.
effect to it too. There's like a sound effect to it of like the germs cheering. I can't prove it. But
Yay, yay,
yeah,
we're infecting them, yay.
essentially that's how it is. And so again, like all of a sudden, he's just like spreading the germs more and more. And it if it wasn't for the fact of how horrible the plot and the context of the movie is, it is a really good way of showing how disease spreads. I think they
Yeah.
had something similar to it in the movie Contagion, where they just show, like at the end of the movie, they show the pathway in which Gwyneth Paltrow got the pathogen that killed a bunch of
Yeah.
people in the world.
We see it like we don't get goofy like animations of little specks or anything, but we see like all of the contact points where like this guy, he was butchering the infected pig, and then he wiped his hands without washing them on his apron, and then she shook the hand of Gwyneth Paltrow, and she was drinking from a glass that got picked up by the waiter, and he got sick. Yeah, exactly. Like you see what there's a word for that, fomites. You see them kind of trace all these infected objects and people. And you kind of get the same thing in this one too, only way, way grosser.
Yes. Very, very interesting. As Kai one day is just kind of like walking around Hong Kong, Lily shows up again. Like you kind of forget about her because she's not in the movie a lot. She shows up and she has like the vomit induced nausea smell, and she's like,
Yeah.
oh, Kai is around, and
He's
she actually
here.
tracks him down, calls the Hong Kong police, and then it like breaks out on the news. This man who murdered a whole bunch of people is also inadvertently spreading Ebola. He
Can
is.
you imagine seeing that on the news?
I would be terrified.
I would be absolutely terrified. I mean, we don't have to go into too much detail, but Ebola is terrifying.
It's a 60% survival rate, even if you get treatment.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, go do your own reading, listener. But I mean, it basically like liquefies you from the inside out. Like your body proteins just come apart at the seams, and you basically vomit and diarrhea up all of your internal organs. It's a horrifying, horrifying disease.
Do you remember a couple years ago when like someone came to America that had Ebola? It was like vaguely, I want to say like 2017 or something like that. Like someone on a plane got to America and they were like, that motherfucker has Ebola. And like people were losing their shit. And I ignorantly didn't really understand how serious Ebola is. Who the fuck knows about Ebola until like you live in a pandemic and then you start looking up shit like this, right? Like,
Yeah,
I never really researched Ebola, but I didn't know how like absolutely horrible Ebola was. Everyone goes Ebola is bad, but people also say like, oh man, I stubbed my toe, I almost died.
ow!
So
I
you
stepped on a
can't.
Lego. Ouch!
So yeah, after looking at how horrible Ebola is, holy fuck.
Yeah.
Count me out of ever like I give absolute mad props to fucking doctors.
Oh yeah. There's a really great book. I'm sure a couple listeners will recognize it, called The Hot Zone. I think it was written in the late 80s, early 90s, maybe. I can't remember. But it's kind of like it's nonfiction, but it's essentially a thriller because of how graphically it describes how Ebola spreads and what its symptom train is. But the really interesting part about that book, especially, is they talk about some of the characters, quote unquote, are disease researchers who will like experiment with it in a lab environment, and just the kind of crazy precautions. There's like a tiered system for how they classify the infectiousness and danger of certain viruses, and Ebola is up there with like smallpox in terms of just the scariest possible things that need like maximum protection and containment protocols. And they just talk about these people who are, they basically suit up like, in spacesuits, and how just terrified they are, and they wear all these different layers of gloves. And I think there's a part where one of the people, the researchers, like pricks themselves or something by accident with a needle, or one of the gloves gets compromised. And I just can't imagine medical professionals working around these kinds of horrible, scary viruses that are just so deadly and so easy to communicate, so easy to infect. Yeah, it's crazy. Definitely, if you're a weirdo like us and you're interested in that kind of thing, go read that book too. Maybe after the movie or before. I'm not sure what would be better. What would give better impact.
Oh
Good,
my
good.
God. Dude, I'm on the Ebola Wikipedia right
No,
now.
no, no, no,
Okay,
no.
no, we're doing this. Okay. Are you ready?
No.
In late 1989, Hazleton Research Products Reston Quarantine Unit in Reston, Virginia, suffered an
Yep.
outbreak of fatal illness amongst certain lab monkeys. Oh my fucking God.
Did you not? How you didn't know about that?
I'm not from this area originally.
Oh yeah, there's I think we like to go to the movies before the pandemic. We would go to those video vortexes. There was this. I remember joking when we were in the car driving to the Alamo. There's like a really kind of nondescript facility with that's fenced in. I'm sure it was just some government building, but I remember joking with like, oh, that's where the Ebola primates are being kept. That's where they're keeping Ebola on ice. You remember joking about that?
Yeah, that's a fucking joke. That's not real life. That's a joke.
Little did we know.
Oh my God, I didn't know there was a fucking Ebola outbreak in primates. So, Ebola's
Yeah.
scary. All right. Let's
Yes.
get back to the movie. Let's get back to a work
Thankfully,
of fiction.
yeah. Thankfully, the Ebola in Ebola syndrome is not quite that scary and gruesome. I mean, this movie is gruesome, but the Ebola in this movie is more. You just like there's like weird open sores and the convulsions and the frothing at the mouth. I don't know if that actually happens. I feel like it doesn't, but of all the other gruesome things in this movie, at least the disease itself is somewhat tame compared to the rest of the subject matter.
It says the first symptoms of Ebola are fever, sore throat, muscle pain, and headaches. And then it follows by vomiting, diarrhea, rash, decreased liver and kidney function, at which point some people begin to bleed both internally and externally. The disease kills between 25% to and 90% of those infected, and about 50% on average. Death is often due to shock form fluid loss and typically occurs between 6 to 16 days after the first symptoms appear. What the fuck?
Like lightning. Horrible, horrible lightning.
That is terrifying. Okay, back to the movie. So all of a sudden, a whole bunch of broadcasts are shot out throughout Hong Kong that Kai is a murderer and is transferring Ebola to people. And he's like at home with his girlfriend. And I guess that's the tipping point for the girlfriend. It's not that he's a murderer, it's the fact
It's that
that
he's
he's
infected.
infecting people with Ebola. And she locks him inside of the apartment. Now, Greg, one thing that I found extremely odd of this scene is that she was able to lock him inside of the building, meaning that I could lock you inside your own home.
Yeah, logistically, I'm not quite sure how that worked. That whole part of the movie is a little fuzzy for me. How does he get out? I forget.
He jumps out the window.
That's right. He books out the window. Okay, but yeah, how she would have control over getting him, keeping him inside the building and not just out of the apartment, I don't know.
But anyways, so she locks him inside the apartment. The police show up, and then Kai is able to grab his girlfriend's daughter and he's essentially holding her hostage. As they're like the police are in these hazmat suits, and there's a showdown. The girlfriend starts to convulse and die, and he's kind of like, "Stop playing this game. I don't have Ebola. I'm not spreading this." He doesn't understand that she's dead.
Yeah, she thinks he's faking it or something.
And as he starts to run away, he has like the girl and essentially like the little girl in a headlock. As he starts
Yeah,
to
as a
run away,
hostage.
one of the detectives shoots him in the arm, and he's essentially like, "Oh yeah, am I spreading Ebola?" And he sucks a mouthful of blood and spits it at the detective in his hazmat suit, and he's like,
Oh my god,
"Ebola."
it's so intense. He sucks it out of his gunshot wound and spits it at the guy,
it's
and then
it's
yeah,
disgusting.
yeah, like this guy is just top notch scumbag.
uh as he rounds the corner getting away from the detective, he realizes that he has broken the neck of the little girl, and he just discards her
You
with
know,
like little to no thought.
yeah, it's. I think we've talked about this in other episodes. It takes a lot of balls, I'll say, a technical term, to show kids dying in a movie. Um, it doesn't happen all that often. You could probably, hopefully, count on zero hands the number of times you've seen it, but at least in this case, they didn't show the part in the beginning where they were lighting someone on fire. At least in this case, it wasn't quite so terrible, but this is definitely like a low point for me in terms of just kind of gut wrenching. Like it's almost too much as far
Yes,
as the rest of the movie is concerned. It
it's
could have been way
insane.
worse, but knowing this movie, yeah, that's yeah, really not. Yeah, definitely a low point for sure.
um so he's on the run, and as he's running through the streets of Hong Kong, he is continuously spitting or sucking his blood and spitting it at people, just screaming Ebola.
Yeah, that is my quote of the week actually.
Oh god.
The, I mean, there's so much zany, bonkers shit that is said by this character and others in this movie, but the fact that we're climaxing at the end of this movie with him running through the streets of Hong Kong, spitting blood at people, infected blood at people, and just screaming Ebola, Ebola, Ebola over and over again. It's just, I was so taken in with this movie that you just can't help but laugh. It's just so absurd what you're seeing on the screen. And again, he's running like down an alley. I think he still has the giant butcher's knife at this point too,
Yeah.
because he got hit with a tranquilizer and he had to cut that chunk of meat out of him to get the tranquilizer from to keep it from spreading in the system. And he's just running around Ebola, Ebola, Ebola. It's just like in any other movie, it would just be weird and kind of like annoying. But it's such a perfect climax for this movie because there's no like you've already seen the craziest shit you've ever seen. You can't. There's only so many places you can go, and at this point, of course, it's going to devolve into just screaming Ebola over and over.
Oh yeah. Eventually it comes to a head where the lead detective is hot on the trail of Kai, and they're in like a marketplace type area, and there's like a big pot of stew being made, and it essentially has like a flamethrower attached to keep the flame going, and the detective flamethrowers Kai, in which now Kai
Awesome.
is a flaming Ebola spreading monster,
Torch. Yeah.
because he's also now intentionally running into people, catching them on fire.
Yeah. We see a couple people like the innocent passersby just getting bumped, and now they're on fire too.
uh, and then as he gets hit by a car, and as he's being burned alive, the detectives surround him and start shooting him.
Just unloading.
The only thing that would have made his death better would be like for a dog to come by and piss on him, or like some
Someone throw a
other,
grenade and he explodes.
yeah, some other kind of degrading attack.
Yeah.
uh in at the aftermath, there's a hazmat team that's going around essentially burning all the remnants of Kai, right? Any kind of blood, spit, anything that is left of Kai that is on the streets of Hong Kong.
Right.
Unfortunately, they miss the hunk of meat that he cuts out of his arm when he gets shot by a tranquilizer, and
Mm-hmm.
a dog eats it. And in case people don't know, animals can have Ebola too.
Dun dun
And
dun.
it ends with the dog and this little girl like sharing a puppy kiss.
Oh no.
Ebola
That is Ebola
syndrome.
syndrome. Cut the
Um,
credits.
4 stars.
Yeah.
It is a hard watch.
Yeah, it's one of those movies that it's hard to give a star rating to, because you feel like if you give it a high rating, you're both condoning the things that happen, but and also admitting that you're a huge weirdo. But yeah, I it's it's hard to describe how this could be enjoyable, but something like Last American Virgin can be so genuinely offensive. But yeah, if yeah, for me it's 4.5, maybe even a 5. It's just unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It's paced really well. It's never boring. It's like we said before, it's consistently surprising and innovative in the ways in which it offends your sensibilities.
And it makes you want to see from the get-go how Kai is going to get dispatched.
Oh yeah. Yeah, because he's just the worst, most despicable person ever. And I think maybe that's part of why this can be enjoyable in a way that, yeah, something like Last American Virgin or some of those other bad movies are just genuinely offensive. Like you hate the movie. I think it's because in like those boner comedies, those kinds of offensive things happening are either played for laughs or they're perpetrated by characters who are supposed to be the protagonists, like people you're supposed to sympathize with. Whereas in this movie, it's the joke is always on Kai. Like it's all in service. All the shocking things that happen are in service of showing you how terrible this character is, and you're meant to hate him, but you're not meant to hate the movie. You're like it's hard to describe. Hopefully, I'm describing that right.
Oh no,
But
I definitely I get where you're coming from there,
yeah,
and I totally agree with you. Um, I mean, I think like the hardest part is, you obviously you understand that the gross out effects of all the dead bodies are fake. The hard
mm-hmm.
part comes from the scenes of animal cruelty, and if you get uneased by on-screen rape, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Those are definitely hard watches in this film because they do happen multiple times. But it is 100% something to be seen though.
Yeah,
It
definitely
is
not
it
for
is
everyone. If you're yeah, if you're one of the if you're a kind of person who likes these kind of roller coaster ride types of really niche genre movies, if you're like we mentioned in the beginning, Cannibal Holocaust, the early 2000s torture porn movies like Saw and Hostel, if those kinds of really intense horror thriller movies are something that you kind of enjoy, definitely check this out. But if those movies, if you haven't heard of them, just don't even bother. If you've heard of them and were shocked and didn't like them, stay far away from this. It's not for you.
yeah. But I mean, it is. I hope Vinegar Syndrome finds more films like this and puts them out. I
Yeah.
would be very interested in watching more. What, level 3?
Category 3.
Category 3, level 3,
Level
category
3.
3 films that come out of Hong Kong, and interesting to see definitely other foreign films that I guess would be considered shocking from their own country, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially like Hong Kong. I think like I've seen a lot of Japanese movies. I think Hong Kong is definitely one that I've seen the least of.
The fewest. Yeah, you tend to think more of martial arts films or kind of the kind of like the hard boiled, the kind of crime action movies that come out of there. You don't tend to think of Hong Kong cinema as being having produced a lot of horror, but yeah, it's not only have they produced a lot, but it's unique in a lot of ways, like this one. So it's definitely something to. I think you brought up Japanese horror. That's a good. I feel like that's a lot of people's in the early 2000s when the Ring remake came out.
The Ring and The Grudge and
The
all that.
Grudge, Dark Water, I think was one of them. Like there was that kind of like influx of Japanese horror kinds of movies that came into the States. I think that was probably a lot of people's intro to horror movies from that part of the world. But definitely check out, use that as a springboard because there's a lot more out there. Things like this, less intense too. I think something that's a little bit more approachable. But check this out. There's a lot of good horror movies that have come out of Indonesia. Queen of Black Magic, I think Satan's Slaves, I think is another one. It's all very unique stuff, and it's a little strange because I feel like we saw Ebola syndrome first, which like we almost went into it backwards. Like I feel like this is something we would have worked up to otherwise, but there's definitely a lot out there that's worth checking out.
Exactly. I wonder if this is like the height of it. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in we'll probably try to seek out some of these other these other films.
When we want to break from the usual canon crap, we'll take a segue.
Have you watched anything recently that's less horrifying, less degenerative?
Oh yeah, yeah. So the other I use my Christmas money to buy some new Blu-rays. I think the big kind of splurge that I used some gift cards on was the Shaw Scope Volume 1 release from Arrow Video. It's a really nice quality box set of old Shaw Brothers kung fu movies from the 70s.
Nice.
I'm very much kind of a noob when it comes to kung fu movies. I've seen things that came from there, that tradition, like Kill Bill, and I always like those movies. I've never seen any of Bruce Lee's movies, strangely enough. This was kind of I remember you and I were talking about when Shang-Chi came out and how much I loved the kind of kung fu elements in that. I think that was what got me down this path. I ended up watching a movie called Master of the Flying Guillotine, which I think we talked about a couple episodes ago, but I wanted to kind of deep dive a little bit more into the origins, kind of some of the earlier ones that made it to Western theaters, Western audiences. So I picked up this box set and I watched King Boxer, I think the kind of the first one in the set, and it was awesome. I mean, in a way it's like watching Seinfeld now, where in some ways it seems formulaic because it's a very familiar kung fu movie, but I think it's because it was one of the ones that kind of did that formula first and did it really well and broke out to like a mass market appeal. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I watched recently. What about you?
That's a good way of putting it, right? It's when if you sat someone down right now to watch Seinfeld, they'd be like, this is so commonplace, but at the time it was
new,
groundbreaking. So yeah, I've watched a few films recently. I watched the Tiger Claws trilogy, another Vinegar Syndrome release.
Another martial arts trilogy, right?
Yeah. Bolo Jung is in it. It definitely the first two are pretty good, pretty decent. The last one is a giant piece of shit. Like a giant piece of shit. I can't stress that enough.
Like almost couldn't finish it, giant.
It wasn't until the end. If I kind of told you why, it would ruin the entire film. But it is one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to films. It does it. And yeah, so it gets the piece of shit award. I've also rewatched a comedy called Run Ronnie Run. Now
Ronnie Run, never heard of it.
This movie it was made after Joe Dirt. It's about a redneck who becomes famous and a star of his own reality program, and it stars David Cross and Bob Odenkirk.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, I remember being really young because the movie came out in 2002, just thinking this movie was hilarious. And I sat down with my wife and rewatched it. And it's not that
Not so
funny.
much.
It's not after you've grown up. It's kind of like the same joke over and over again. And it gets old pretty quick. Even
Hmm.
Bob Odenkirk is just kind of like he puts on a British affectation in the film, and it just kind of falls flat. It's like not a
Ugh.
really good um accent. And one of the jokes in the movie is that it's not he he doesn't even have the accent. He's just putting it on. And I'm just like, then why even do it? But it doesn't matter. The movie's horrible. Definitely not starting the year off right in terms of great quality movies. Uh
Until
yeah.
Ebola syndrome.
Until
Thank
Ebola
God.
syndrome.
Thank you, Ebola syndrome.
Well, I guess we did see Spider-Man. Like, well, we didn't see it together, but we both saw
Oh, that's true.
Spider-Man.
Yeah. I mean, that definitely bears mention. I mean, I think that was a good. Well, I think it was a little annoying that it kind of copied so much from Into the Spider-Verse. Spoilers, by the way, if you have not seen that yet, go watch it before you listen
Spoilers.
to us
Tobey
spoil
Maguire's in it. Um,
it. Say what? Yeah. No, it was yeah, that was great way to I assume that's kind of wrapping up this phase of the Spider-Man, right? Because is he coming back? Is he going to
he
be?
is. He's
He is
signed up
okay.
for three more. I think they're
Okay.
gonna call it like the college trilogy, right? This was like the high school one. Then it'll be like the college trilogy.
All right.
So
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, it was awesome seeing Tommy Maguire and Andrew Garfield right again.
yeah.
All the classic villains. God, can you? Willem Dafoe is just such a good like actor of crazy. His Goblin is just off the wall. I love it.
Yes. I actually read an interview where in the movie they Norman Osborn goes, "Oh, there's no equivalent of me in this universe." And I guess Kevin Feige, the producer of all these Marvel movies, was like, "Yeah, we said that intentionally because we can't really foresee anyone ever hitting his acting level, right? They like no one's ever going to beat Willem Dafoe, so we're not going to even try."
Yeah.
So pretty interesting.
Oh yeah,
Um,
and they were right because he's the goat for that for sure.
oh yeah, he was awesome. But yeah, I think that's everything I've seen really recently.
Yeah, that's pretty much about it. So if you'll indulge me, Phil, because Ebola syndrome, it just feels like it bears so much extra attention. It got shock value out of us. The first thing I wanted to ask you before we wrap this episode up is, what did your wife think of this movie?
She left. She left during a certain part, and I want to say it was when they were when they were doing the autopsy, and they were peeling back the skin of that guy's head. Jackie looked at it and she was like, I'm gonna go give the kid a shower. Like, I'm gonna go clean the kid.
I'm going to go and then myself because I feel filthy.
She did come back a little bit later, like she saw the Ebola cam and stuff, but uh she was disgusted. She looked away a lot of the time during the film.
Oh no,
Just not
not
just
her
not
cup of
really
tea.
interested. Yeah. Yeah. It was definitely the face peel part that she walked away from.
Oh yeah.
I think Becky had a similar reaction.
Yeah, that's why I asked. It was almost hilarious how much on the same page they were, except Becky got to have that experience the first time back in 2020 when we first watched it on DVD. She was unfortunate enough to be in the room when I watched it, and she hates this movie so much. It's just so gross. She puts this in the same category as street trash in just terms of gross out value. She just hates it. And it was when we realized that we were watching it tonight, it's like she didn't realize that Jackie was going to be watching it too, and she felt so bad. It's like, oh, why would you guys do that to her?
I definitely I read Jackie the little blurb that you sent me about Ebola syndrome, right? Where it's like, one of the most disgusting films ever made. Literally Kai fucks a piece of meat in it and comes in it and then like serves it to someone. So
And she was
we
still
didn't
on
even talk
board.
about that part. But yeah, like she was on board. She wanted to watch it, so she attempted.
Once and never again. Yeah, I think they had her and Becky had pretty similar experiences. So again, if it a reiterate, it's not for everyone. It's definitely like for the really hardcore audiences only. Again, I think you and I are the kind of weirdos that this is aimed for, but for the most part, don't feel bad or like you're less of a horror fan if you can't get through this. It's it's totally fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, what I also wanted to end on was reading some other like reviews out there on the internet. A lot of these were written, I think, before the Vinegar Syndrome release. So these were the other people, I think these are review sites that kind of focus on Asian horror or just Asian cinema in general. But they're just really great ways to sum it up in a way that maybe we haven't already. So I'll just read a couple quotes here, which I think are really good summaries about this. From horrornews.net, the writer says, if cinema were a garbage can and its patrons were alley cats scavenging through the filth, desperate for whatever scrap they could find, this film would be a rancid piece of trash rotting at the bottom. In that sense, Ebola Syndrome deserves every accolade and recommendation. Bon appetit.
Oh God.
That article also said, one of the ones that I sent to you, which is, the film is a smorgasbord of misogyny, racial slurs, dismemberment, cannibalism, jerk-off humor, sexual violence, golden showers, mistreated children, cruelty to animals, autopsy horror, and ejaculation into foodstuffs. What a terrible list.
Yes.
From AsianMoviePulse.com, the reviewer said, right from the murders in the first few minutes and the explicit frog dicing scenes shortly after, the production fully earns its category 3 rating within the first 10 minutes of its runtime, which I feel like we kind of touched on that, but the fact that this movie goes so hard right out of the gate, definitely a credit to the director and the performances.
Oh, definitely.
And from cityonfire.com, the reviewer said, as this film climaxes, it breaks into that secret world of Hong Kong filmmaking madness that blows the mind. It cannot be described because that would be a massive spoiler, which we did. But rest assured, this one does not disappoint. So I feel like that's what a great way to sum it up. So yeah, like you said before, I think you and I will probably start to dip our toes or maybe our whole feet or just jump in headfirst into more of this genre in the future.
Yes, most definitely. Yeah. Oh, you know what? I will say before we end the conversation on Ebola syndrome, Kai multiple times throughout the movie kept on saying, "You're busting my balls," which Jackie looked at me and she was like, "That's what Cartman says in South Park all the time." So,
oh man, you busted my balls.
You're busting my balls.
I think that's like his last line in the movie before he croaks, isn't it?
Yeah, you're busting my balls.
You stop busting my balls. Ugh.
Awesome.
Classic.
Awesome.
A+.
Awesome. Yes, 4 stars. Well, if you like what you're hearing, and I question, yeah, I guess I really can't, because whatever, you know what I'm getting at. If you like what you're hearing, go ahead.
If you're crazy enough to like it,
subscribe. Send us an email at that'scanon@gmail.com. Follow us on TikTok at That's Canon Podcast. Follow us on Instagram at That's Canon. And just send us an email. I'll read anything that you say. You literally heard us talking about ripping the heads off of chickens this episode.
Yeah. Go if you're crazy enough to try it. Go watch Ebola Syndrome, and let us know what you think. We'd love to hear other opinions on this.
Yes, that's for sure. Are we wrong? You tell us.
No, it's the viewing public that's wrong.
Exactly.
It's decent society that's wrong.
And remember, since we said it,
that's canon.